Anyway, so kind of wanted to share a little bit um, about, I guess, doubt. I mean, in my childhood, you know, I grew up in, I guess, Christian family. So, my life always sort of revolved around the church. And I remember, I would spend the whole day on Sundays at church from morning to like really late evening, because my parents had to go to church early, and I would just follow them. I would just get put into this what do you call it, elementary or preschool through those services, and I would eat lunch afterwards, and so on and so forth. So it's I was very used to those culture that I guess other people might have been experienced it. And on the weekdays, when my parents come from work, especially my mom, she would participate in like those small group meetings with other parents, and sometimes the pastors would join just to lead the Bible studies. And she also was a part of choir, so she had to practice minimum once a week. And I get to I get to go to church those days also, because they provide daycare or after daycare, that kind of stuff. And um, thinking back, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I get to play with my friends, and meeting the pastors or people, or I was back in the days, in Korean culture, you call them hyungs and nunas, and they were the ones who sort of looked after me, and it was very um, fun and enjoyable moment. But those, at the same time, like if I were to look back on it, those exposure to church sort of taught me, or made me doubt is something that is sort of forbidden. It's more like I was told from my from the childhood to high school, even in college, it's like doubting is like a Satan's strategy and influence to weaken my or other people's faith. And certainty is rather what we should strive for, because it's it's a sign of faith, and you should do everything to keep your faith from losing it, or because Satan is trying to attack you and that kind of stuff. And but as more and more that I learn about Christianity, or learn about or reading Bible, there's the flip side to it, I think, because I mean, we shouldn't always treat doubt as something that's forbidden. And reading this verse of Thomas encountering Jesus, um, it seems like I overlooked about Thomas, because there's not much of a description that book of Matthew or Mark or Luke sort of describe him, other than incredulous. And the photo, or the picture, or the painting that I wanted to share was something that I learned in college. It's the painting is called Incredulity of St. Thomas, I believe. It's done by Caravaggio, who also shares the same name as Michelangelo that we all know of. And that painting, he sort of depicts the moment of John putting his, or identifying if the person in front of him is Jesus or not. So it's like this painting was really became popular and famous because it was sort of Caravaggio is like one of the talented Renaissance or Baroque painter who was sort of introduced new way to portray all this stories about gospel, and this new approach sort of lied and the contrast sort of gives a very theatrical, and like when you look at it, it would, if you know the story of the Bible, you will sort of immediately can tell this is the moment that Thomas is trying to identify, and what he is seeing is resurrected, or risen Jesus or not. And here is Thomas, put fingers to see the wound, and Jesus is sort of using his right hand to put down his tunic, and holding John's hand right into that right into the wound. And what it seems like Thomas is always doubting or curious, or is trying to make sure that he is the Christ or not. But at the end of the day, ultimately, it looks like the hand of Jesus is sort of guiding him to that point, which I think that regardless of doubt, or or being more careful about if that is true or not, he is in control. And I guess I kind of jumped here and back, sort of skipped one of my, I guess what I wanted to share is that so ultimately, Thomas, well, sorry, I need to go back, I guess. So what I guess what I wanted to say is Thomas, will always depicted as sort of doubtful or incredulous. He had his time, well, let me go back, sorry. So I guess what I found about John was, Thomas was in John chapter 11, he follows the Jesus who's on his way to see Lazarus, and Thomas makes this statement, or sort of encourages everyone, saying, let us go too, and so that we may die with Jesus. It seemed like he was pretty determined and do whatever. Like Peter, he wanted to do everything for Jesus. But at the same time, when you go to chapter 14, and Thomas sort of tells Christ, saying, he doesn't know, he has no clue, pretty much, which means he sort of says, him and rest of the disciples don't know where Jesus is going or headed to, and how am I supposed to know, pretty much. And which shows a sign of incredulity. And lastly, in chapter 20 that we are sharing, he makes a bold statement, pretty much saying, unless I see it, unless I see the nail marks in his hand, and unless I put my fingers into the wound, I wouldn't believe it. And that sort of sets Thomas's, I guess, characteristic in those three, remarks that he makes in chapter John. He goes back and forth, I think. He's a very careful person, but when he follows Jesus, saying, I believe you, I'll do everything that I can. But in the process, he goes like, wait a minute, I don't understand. I don't know where you're going. And I guess when Jesus was crucified, he gets disappointed. He wanders off somewhere, and tells his friends, pretty much, even though you guys experience it, I wouldn't believe it. And the painting of Caravaggio is sort of depicting that moment. I mean, I don't think the Bible doesn't, when I read it in chapter 20, it doesn't really describe Thomas actually putting his finger into the wound. He just says that I would believe it when I see it. And when Jesus, pretty much tells him, I mean, I'm here, you know, you wouldn't believe what you see. And Thomas pretty much collapses and, say, you're my Lord, and takes everything back and regrets it. And thinking all of that and growing up, doubt is something that I shouldn't do. I guess that's not completely true, because it keeps, well, the first thing that certainty, I think, is crucial, but at the same time, well, I guess I should rephrase it. Certainty towards God is essential. I think that's one of the things that we all need to have. But there are times that we sort of started to doubt or question maybe the existence of God. I guess most of my friends, after high school, they became either agnostic or just don't go to church anymore. And I don't think, and one of the reasons is it's not that they don't believe in God or they never doubted God before, but it was more like the middleman. It's us or the teachers or the friends who sort of we were in all together, but as you spend times with them, you see the flaws, and you started to doubting those people, and then that becomes that replaces, I guess, that doubt sort of goes towards God, even though God never sort of disappointed you. It's the people that disappointed you, so that it results in you leaving the church, or you don't believe in God anymore, because if there's God, then why would you make those people do something that against your teaching? And you see those flaws here and there, but at the same time, those flaws comes in because we were so focused on certainty. I think it's more like it sort of calcifies. I think it's sort of when you are certain about certain things, it sort of drives you that there is no check and balance. It becomes absolute, becomes your self-righteous, so that you wouldn't see, or you were pretty much blinded by your thoughts, and those kind of things that I guess the final statement is, or the one of the things that I wanted to say is, if we don't accept, I guess, both commonality or importance of doubt, we sort of don't allow for the possibility of the mistakes. I think that's the right statement that I wanted to make, or misjudgments. And while certainty sort of frequently calcifies into like a rigidity or intolerance or self-righteousness, doubt sort of can deepen and sort of clarify and explain what's going on around us, and sort of helps us to correct things during the process. And like Caravaggio's painting, even though we have that doubt, maybe it could be the Satan or something bad or whatever it is. Ultimately, God's in control, because he's holding your hand to the right direction. And God sort of recommends or encourages us to believe without seeing, but sometimes it is really difficult, or sometimes we fall for our own mistakes. So doubting, I don't think we shouldn't forbid or try to make us to think that doubting is such a bad thing. And that's sort of what I wanted to share today.